Respect isn't something you demand, it's something people forget to give until they're reminded who you are. Let us know in the comments section below. What would you have done if you saw an old man sitting alone, ignored, for 40 minutes? Walter Riley didn't need anyone to open the door for him. He'd opened the gates of too many fire bases in the dead of night, carrying the weight of wounded brothers across burning jungle trails. His spine wasn't what it used to be. Too many jumps, too many years, but he still stood tall. Not stiff, not proud, just steady. As if invisible ropes of discipline still ran through his frame, anchoring him in a world that had moved on without him. He walked into Marlene's diner without hesitation. Noon crowd, plenty of chatter, plates clinking, forks scraping ceramic, and the low murmur of a college game on the muted TV in the corner. A bell chimed over the door, but no one looked up. Not even the hostess, who stood at the podium, flipping through laminated menus like she had all the time in the world. Walt paused, adjusted his ball cap. The faded green one embroidered with a Vietnam campaign ribbon and the eagle of the 101st Airborne. His jacket was clean, the collar stiff from habit, and his boots still bore the polish of someone who never forgot inspection day. Still no acknowledgement. He cleared his throat softly and took a seat at a booth near the window. Not out of entitlement, just because he didn't feel like waiting to be invited. He sat facing the room, as always, back to the wall, eyes forward. Some habits, 30 seconds, a minute, 3. He timed it, the way soldiers do when they're keeping count under pressure. After 10 minutes, he stopped keeping count. Not one glance. Not from the teenage waitress chewing gum behind the counter. Not from the cook who leaned out to yell, "Order up!" to someone else. Not even from the elderly couple who sat across from him, their eyes politely avoiding the war patch on his hat like it was a political opinion. Walt didn't fidget. Didn't sigh. He just watched. Watched as the waitress laughed with a group of college boys in baseball caps. Watched the busboy wipe down a table near him 3 times without so much as a nod. Watched as the hostess finally seated a pair of middle-aged women who'd walked in after him. He felt it. That slow, creeping heat in the chest. Not anger. Not quite. Something deeper. Sadder. Like standing at a homecoming parade and realizing the cheers aren't for you. A group of kids passed by on their way to the restroom. One of them looked at him, no more than 10, and squinted at the ribbons on Walt's hat. His lips moved like he was trying to sound them out, but then his mother pulled his hand and whispered something that made the boy's eyes drop to the floor. Walt closed his eyes. He didn't come here for fanfare. He just wanted a turkey club, black coffee, and 10 minutes not spent alone in his silent living room. But here he was, a ghost at table 7. He remembered heat far worse than this. Remembered choking smoke and screaming through radio static. Remembered pulling a 17-year-old private undercover while tracer rounds stitched the sky above them. That kid never made it home. Walt did. And now he couldn't even get a damn menu. From the kitchen, the cook barked, "Where's table 7's order?" The waitress shrugged. Nobody sitting there. You sure about that? He glanced over, blinked as if seeing him for the first time, then looked away. He didn't wave me down. Walt's mouth opened slightly, then closed again. He looked at his hands, scarred, sun-beaten, stronger than most men half his age. He didn't need to wave anyone down. He just needed someone to see him. And yet, 40 minutes passed. The door opened again. Another bell. Another gust of noise. The room didn't change. But Walt did, because the man who stepped in wasn't just another customer. He had the same steel-straight posture, the same kind of walk, not cocky, not casual, purposeful. And though age had carved deep lines into his face and silver streaked his once back hair, there was no mistaking the eyes. Sharp, observant, commanding, Colonel James Everett had walked into many rooms like this, rooms full of strangers, tension, and unspoken rules. And always, people made way for him. But today, he wasn't here to take command. Today, he was here for one man. He scanned the room once, found him instantly. Walt didn't move, but a ghost of a smile crept onto his face. Everett walked straight to the booth and sat across from him without a word. No handshake, no salute, just understanding. It wasn't until the waitress came up, casual smile, ready to offer a menu, that she finally looked at Walt again. Truly looked. And something in her expression shifted. Confusion, recognition, regret, but it was too late. The colonel turned to her, voice calm but edged like a drawn knife. "How long's he been sitting here?" She opened her mouth, closed it. Everett didn't wait for the answer. "Good. Then you've got 40 minutes to pack your things. And tell the manager I'd like to discuss the sale of this place." The diner froze. Someone dropped a fork. Walt leaned back, folded his arms. He didn't need applause, didn't need free meals or special discounts. Just once, he wanted to be seen. And now someone had seen everything. The silence that followed Colonel Everett's words wasn't just awkward. It was oppressive, the kind of hush that slams down like a heavy door. Forks hovered in mid-air. Conversations froze mid-sentence. A lone sugar packet tumbled from a table edge to the floor with a whisper-soft thud, and still no one moved. The waitress, Melanie, her name tag read, stood there, blinking, like someone who had just realized they'd stepped in front of an oncoming train. Her face flushed a deep crimson, her eyes darting to Walt and back to the colonel, as if trying to piece together how something so simple had spiraled into something irreversible. "I didn't mean," she started, but Everett's stare pinned her words like insects under glass. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He simply reached into the inside pocket of his blazer and laid a small leather-bound checkbook on the table between them, followed by a stainless steel fountain pen, engraved, elegant, and deliberate. "I don't want her fired," Walt said suddenly, his voice gravelly but firm. Everett turned to him, just slightly, not with surprise, but with something closer to respect. "I'm not firing her, Walt. I'm buying a mistake. You and I both know it costs more to ignore one." Walt leaned forward, elbows on the table, hands clasped. His eyes studied the younger patrons in the diner, the college boys now whispering among themselves, the middle-aged women shooting guilty glances his way, the cook peeking through the kitchen window, like a child hiding behind curtains. "This town doesn't need another place to eat," Walt muttered. "No," Everett replied. "It needs a place where people remember who built it." Melanie cleared her throat. "I didn't know who he was. I thought—" She trailed off, realizing just how hollow anything she might say would sound now. "You thought he was just an old man," Everett said, not cruelly but with surgical precision. "One of the millions who slip into the background until they're only seen when they become inconvenient, or expensive, or someone's problem." Walt's jaw tightened. "I was just doing my job," she whispered. "No, you weren't," he replied. A few heads turned toward the booth. Someone snapped a picture with their phone. Not of Everett, not of Melanie, but of Walt. A single photo, the kind that would be uploaded with a caption like, "This man waited 40 minutes and changed everything." But Walt didn't notice. He was staring out the window now, eyes unfocused, looking at something no one else could see. In his mind, he was back in Hue, February '68. Treetops on fire, the stench of cordite and fear thick in the air. He was shouting orders to a green kid named Russo when the radio went dead and the mortars began. He remembered dragging bodies through waist-deep water, remembering which limbs still twitched, which didn't. He remembered Everett, a fresh-faced captain then laying down cover fire from a shattered second-story window, refusing to retreat until every man was out. 40 minutes didn't mean much in a peaceful place, but under fire, 40 minutes could be the distance between life and death, between whether your name ended up carved in stone or you lived long enough to grow old and be forgotten in a booth at a place like this. Everett opened the checkbook and began writing, each stroke precise. The diner manager finally arrived, a portly man in a white shirt with a ketchup stain on the pocket and stress permanently etched into his expression. He approached cautiously, glancing at the crowd, then the colonel. "Sir, can I help you?" Everett didn't look up from the check. "You're behind on your rent, your freezer's compressor is shot, and your last health inspection had a warning for rodent droppings in the storeroom. But you have one thing worth saving." The manager blinked. "What's that?" This man's patience. He slid the check across the table, slow and deliberate. "I'll have my attorney contact your landlord. In the meantime, you'll stay on to train the new staff." "Staff?" Everett's eyes lifted. "Veterans." A wave of murmurs passed through the room, like a low tide. Melanie looked down at the floor. "I didn't mean to be cruel, I just—" "This," Walt said quietly, "is the whole problem." He stood, slow and careful. His knees weren't what they used to be, but he still moved with a kind of practiced dignity. As he rose, a few patrons nearby instinctively stood too, unsure why, only knowing it felt right. Others followed. Then a young man at the counter, early 20s, ROTC haircut, stepped forward and said, "Sir, I'm sorry for what happened." Walt nodded once. "Appreciate it." "May I?" the kid asked, gesturing toward the booth. Walt paused. Everett gave the faintest grin. "Still a teacher, huh?" The young man slid into the seat and asked, "What unit were you with, sir?" Walt looked at him, then out the window again, and for the first time in what felt like years, he began to speak. By the time his coffee arrived, finally hot, finally black, finally poured with care, 3 more people had joined the table. One brought their own father, a Gulf War vet. Another came back from the kitchen with 2 slices of pie on the house. Nobody was looking at the menu anymore. They were listening. The weight of 40 minutes had lifted, not erased, but carried. By those who cared, by those who remembered, and by those who finally saw that the man sitting at table 7 had never been invisible. He had just been waiting for the world to catch up. The old sign came down 2 weeks later. It was a rusty relic, white with faded red letters that once read Marlene's Diner. A cigarette burn scarred the bottom corner of the metal, and one of the chain links holding it had long since given up. Walt watched them take it down from his folding chair across the street, parked beside his beat-up Ford Ranger. He hadn't planned to watch the whole process, but something about it felt ceremonial, like lowering a flag. The new sign wasn't flashy, just clean. A matte black panel with gold stenciling that read Echo Company Cafe. Below it, a bronze plaque mounted near the entrance read simply, "In honor of those who waited in silence." Walt didn't know who wrote that line, but when he read it, he had to look away. Everett came out the front door, adjusting his collar, sleeves rolled to the elbows. He moved with purpose, but it was clear he was no longer the young captain who once leapt from Huey skids into rice paddies. Still, command clung to him like a second skin. He walked across the street and handed Walt a styrofoam cup of coffee. "They'll drink it black." "You remember?" Walt said, accepting it. Everett sat down beside him, both of them watching as workers fastened the final bolts into the new sign. "The grand opening's in 3 days," Everett said. "Fully staffed, all of them vets. Some young, some older. I even pulled in a retired corpsman to run the kitchen. Makes a chicken fried steak that'll stop your heart in the best way." Walt took a sip. "This place, it's more than you needed to do." "No," Everett said quietly. "It's exactly what I needed to do." A silence settled between them. comfortable and heavy with unspoken things. Cars passed. A bus hissed to a stop a block away. Someone walked a dog across the crosswalk, pausing to glance at the two men before continuing on. Watt finally spoke. "You ever think about what it means? The fact that it took 40 minutes of being ignored for all this to happen?" "I think about it every night," Everett said. "And I wonder how many other places are out there where men like you walk in and disappear." Walt didn't answer. His hands tightened around the coffee. "They're not bad people," he said. "That girl, the staff, they weren't cruel, just distracted. They see a veteran and they think of folded flags, movie scenes, parades. They don't think of groceries, lonely meals, quiet mornings." Everett nodded. "They don't think of waiting." A motorcycle rumbled past, two riders, young, indifferent. One of them glanced over at the cafe and did a double take, not because of the new sign, but because of the two men sitting quietly across the street staring back like sentinels. The bike turned at the corner. "Gone." "I got a letter last week," Everett said, changing the subject. "From a kid in town, high school senior. Said his granddad served in Korea. Never talked about it. After what happened here, after he read the article, the old man finally opened up. Said he felt like someone had opened a locked door inside him." Walt looked down at his boots. "One day, you're in charge of a platoon. The next, you're in charge of remembering where you put your reading glasses. Or your cane," Everett added, chuckling softly. "Or your damn hearing aids." They both laughed, not loud, but honest. The door to the cafe opened again. A woman stepped out. Melanie. Her hair pulled back now, sleeves rolled, apron neat. She looked different, not just in uniform, but in posture, like someone who'd gone through something and come out the other side shaped by it. She crossed the street and stopped in front of them, wiping her hands nervously on her apron. "Mr. Riley," she said. "Walt," he corrected. "Walt," she repeated, then looked to Everett. "Colonel." "Jim," he said with a smile. She nodded, nervous. "I just wanted to say thank you for not letting that moment define me. You gave me another shot." Walt looked at her. "You gave yourself another shot. You just needed to see what you'd been blind to." She nodded. "I see it now. I see him now," she said, motioning to Walt's hat, the one he wore every day now with quiet pride. "I was offered a position elsewhere last week. Better pay, shorter hours. I turned it down." "Why?" Walt asked, genuinely curious. "Because this isn't just a job anymore. It's a mission." Everett nodded, satisfied. "You're right, and missions need people who can take the hard lessons and keep going." She looked at them both, then added, "We're running a Coffee for a Vet program on Mondays. First cup's free." People started adding money to the jar unprompted. Walt smiled. "People remember more than we think." She gave a small wave and returned to the cafe, leaving the two men in silence once again. Everett looked sideways. "You ever think you'd see the day someone turned a diner into a command post?" Walt smirked. "You always did like unconventional warfare." I sat there a while longer, watching the world pass by. No medals, no speeches. Just two old soldiers sipping coffee, guarding a new kind of perimeter. And Everett's phone buzzed. He checked it, frowned. "Something wrong?" Walt asked. "Sort of," Everett replied. "We got press coming for the opening, local and state level. They want someone to speak." Walt groaned. "Don't look at me." Everett grinned. "Too late. Already told them you were the reason this place exists." "I didn't do anything." "You did exactly what you were trained to do. You waited, you observed, you endured." Walt shook his head, but something in his eyes softened. "You really think anyone cares what an old grunt like me has to say?" Everett didn't hesitate. "I think people have been waiting a long time to hear from someone who remembers what honor looks like. Walt leaned back in the chair, sipped the last of his coffee, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he was waiting anymore. He felt like he was home. Walt stood behind the podium and stared at the small crowd gathered on the patio outside the newly reopened Echo Company Cafe. The American flag beside him caught the morning wind just enough to ripple, snapping softly above a field of folding chairs filled with veterans, locals, families, and reporters scribbling in notepads. Someone had tied a simple yellow ribbon around the base of the flagpole. He could feel a bead of sweat slide down the side of his face, though the spring air was crisp. It wasn't the crowd that unnerved him. 'Twas being looked at. Not through, not past, but at. And not for the first time in years, but for the first time with understanding. Everett gave him a small nod from the front row. So did Melanie, apron still dusted with flour. She'd baked all morning. The young ROTC cadet who'd shared the booth weeks ago was there too, sitting beside his grandfather, in a pressed army jacket that smelled of mothballs and memory. Walt tapped the side of the microphone. It whined once before settling. He took a breath. "I didn't ask for this place to change its name," he began, his voice steady, slow. "I didn't ask for a free meal or a seat with my name on it." He looked out at the audience, pausing. "I walked in here 6 weeks ago hoping for a sandwich and a cup of coffee. What I got was silence, the kind that doesn't feel empty, it feels deliberate, like the world had taken one look at me and decided I was done." The crowd was quiet now, their faces sober. 40 minutes passed before anyone said a word to me. In that time, I thought about all the places I'd been. Not to brag, not to relive, just to remind myself I hadn't always been a man people looked past. He smiled slightly, and then an old voice came through the door. A familiar pair of boots hit the floor, and suddenly, I wasn't invisible anymore. Walt nodded toward Everett. "That man over there reminded me, and reminded this town, that dignity isn't something you're handed, it's something you carry. But that doesn't mean others shouldn't recognize the weight of it." A pause. Someone sniffled in the back. "Us Cafe stands for something now, not just veterans, but patience, respect, memory. It stands for the people who get up every day and show up, whether they're noticed or not. It stands for the idea that being forgotten doesn't mean being gone." Walt stepped back from the mic. He didn't need applause. But the crowd stood anyway. Not clapping at first, just rising quietly to their feet, one after another, like soldiers mustering for something greater than themselves. And then, slowly, hands came together. The clapping built like a tide, cresting and breaking into cheers. Everett approached and pulled Walt into a rough hug, the kind men like them gave, full of unspoken things. He leaned in and whispered, "You did good, Sergeant." Walt just muttered, "I prefer coffee to speeches." The ribbon-cutting followed. Everett handed Walt the ceremonial scissors, but Walt shook his head and passed them to a young woman in uniform, a Marine lance corporal named Sarah, who'd just finished her first tour. "It's her turn," he said, and Sarah cut the ribbon with wide eyes and a proud, awkward smile that lit up her whole face. Inside, the diner buzzed with new energy. Framed black-and-white photographs of veterans lined the walls, now some posed, some candid, some haunting. One showed Everett and Walt in Vietnam, their faces half shown under helmets, grins sharp against the chaos around them. A wooden board near the register bore the etched names of every veteran employed at the cafe, past and present. The Wall of Service, they called it. Walt's name was first. The staff wore black shirts with small stenciled emblems. A steaming mug wrapped in a dog-tag chain, underneath it the words, "We remember." The vibe was different now, not solemn, but alive. Waitresses laughed, customers leaned in to hear stories, and the clink of utensils was backed by the occasional tap of a cane, the shuffle of a boot, or the crisp bark of a service dog trained to catch its veteran before they slipped. Walt sat in his usual booth, same spot by the window, now marked with a brass plaque that read, "Reserved for those who waited and those who served." A fresh coffee arrived without asking, black, 2 sugars, exactly how he liked it. Melanie brought it over herself. "I'll never forget again," she said. Walt smiled at her. "That's the idea." She glanced out at the growing line at the door. "You think it'll last, all this?" Walter took a sip. "Not unless we make it." Outside, kids played on the sidewalk. A father was helping his daughter understand the patches on Walt's hat. She asked what airborne meant. The man knelt beside her, explaining softly. Walt watched, not just the girl, not just her dad. He watched the moment and knew something had shifted. Later that afternoon, a familiar face appeared at the door, one Walt hadn't seen in decades. "Riley," the man said, stepping inside. "Walt Riley, you son of a gun, I knew that was you." Walt stood, stunned. "No damn way, McNally?" George McNally, former medic, foul-mouthed, fast-thinking, once thought KIA outside Da Nang, but here he was, rounder in the middle, white in the beard, and grinning like hell. They embraced like time hadn't passed, like ghosts had finally laid down their rifles. "How'd you find me?" Someone shared a video. Said a soldier turned a diner into a rally point. I thought, hell, only one man I know'd pull that off without a single shot fired. They laughed, sat, caught up for hours, and as the sun lowered over the cafe, casting gold across the sign and the sidewalk and the gathering outside, Walt felt something close to peace settle on his shoulders. It wasn't just that he'd been seen or that he'd been heard. It was that he was no longer alone. And in a world that too often moved too fast to notice its own foundations, that might have been the greatest honor of all.